Hey everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. My name is Eric Skwarczynski. Of course, I'm your host. And on today's episode, I want to respond to something that was mentioned on the Spirit of Liberty broadcast, which is Pastor Tommy McMurtry's YouTube channel. And I honestly don't watch it very often. I'm familiar with Tommy. I've seen his clips. Obviously, he gets mentioned on IFB Sermon Clips, the Twitter account, pretty often, but I don't keep up super well. I've talked to Tommy once over the phone, and he's part of the new IFB, which is kind of Stephen Anderson's group. But anyway, he mentioned me on the podcast today, his broadcast on March 28th, 2021. And so I just want to address some of the comments he made about the Preacher Boys podcast, some of the stuff his team kind of talked about, and kind of break it down and just share my responses. He kind of bemoaned the fact that no one called in to challenge anything on the live show. I didn't know the show was happening, didn't know I was going to get mentioned. And so I guess I'll kind of respond now and go from here.
Podcast guy.
So they just mentioned the Recovering Fundamentalist and my podcast. They get grouped together a lot. Obviously, we don't have an affiliation. Recovering Fundamentalist is three pastors that talk through like theology, really good guys. Really appreciate them. And then my show is on its own, Preacher Boys podcast, where I talk about abuse specifically within the church.
These guys that they expose the sin, but then they use it as an excuse to teach feminism and other weird, bad doctrines.
So I get this accusation a lot, which is that the Preacher Boys podcast is sort of a Trojan horse for me to bring in quote unquote liberal or left wing or, new age ideology and teach it through my show. There's two things with that. One, the show is created for the explicit purpose of exposing abuse within independent fundamental Baptist churches, equipping survivors, and engaging in thoughtful conversations. That's what the show is about. As far as actually teaching, I don't really teach on my show. Sometimes I'll teach a quick tip on how to identify something. I'll teach, like there'll be little things here and there. But for the most part, I'm interviewing a guest. I'm taking on the role of a journalist. I'm bringing on a guest. I'm asking them questions. Some of their statements I may agree with, some I don't. Some people I think would be surprised where I land on different issues because it's, kind of fluctuates a little bit with each, but I've never had a guest on I fully agree with. I've never sat down in a coffee shop with someone I fully agree with. So the idea that everyone I bring on, I'm positioning them as a teacher is not the case. I'm taking on the role of journalist, asking questions and allowing them to share their perspective in an unedited, uncensored way. So no, the show is not created for me to, sneak all my liberal theology into. And I think people will be surprised how orthodox I actually am as a Christian myself.
Yeah, which I'll tell you the truth, I don't know if I'm just not really seeing stuff, but that Preacher Boys podcast, I don't really have a whole lot of problems with them. I mean, yeah, I get irritated with
Austin.
Some of the random liberal stuff that they talk about. But I mean, the thing is, if anyone has a problem with him exposing the garbage that's going on in their church, here's a real easy way to take care of him. Whenever you have garbage like that in your church, you deal with it. And then he doesn't have to say anything about it, because.
And this 100% hits the nail on the head. Austin's spot on here. The biggest way that people can avoid being mentioned on the Preacher Boys podcast or getting called out or included or, whatever you want to say from the show is don't get involved in abuse. Don't stand up for abusers. Don't be abusive in your messaging or in your, physically abusive, sexually abusive. Don't cover up for pedophiles. Like, don't do those things. You're not going to get mentioned. The reason Tommy doesn't get mentioned on my show very often, yeah, he says some stuff that honestly, like, and I would tell Tommy this, like, he says some things from the pulpit that I think are really stupid and harmful to a lot of people. We've talked on the phone. Like, I've talked about some of this stuff. There is things that he says that I would never say. I may address it in passing, but Tommy has expressed how much he hates sex abuse. He's called out pedophiles in the IFB as well. And so if I was doing a theology podcast or a, church philosophy podcast, which I'm not doing, I'd probably engage with some of Tommy's stuff a little bit more. But when it comes to abuse, like Tommy at that level is an ally in the idea of he doesn't like physical or sexual abuse. Again, Tommy says some stuff about, people I'm friends with who are pastors. He's made very, very, very rude remarks about them. I'm not cool with that. And so like, I don't think I would partner with Tommy in a public setting around any of that stuff. Like I can just stand there and go like, thanks for calling out abuse. That's about the extent of that relationship. But anyway, yeah, if you don't want to get called out on the show, don't abuse people. That's a pretty good rule of thumb coming here from Austin. I believe it's Austin. I hope I'm not getting that wrong.
A lot of times too, I can see where certain situations have maybe been blown a little bit out of proportion of what actually happened, and something could have gotten exaggerated or something, and a situation may have been made to look worse than it actually was. Well, the thing is, if you would have just been upfront with what happened in the first place, then you don't have to worry about someone coming along.
And this is also true. This is something that happens a lot as people make accusations of something being exaggerated or someone's story being exaggerated. Present your side of the story, present the proof, present, the thing that shows that it's been exaggerated. But many times every time these churches respond, with the exception of 2 or 3 times. And in those cases, I ended up making amendments to my videos. For the most part, they're not forthcoming about what actually happened. When they are, and when the facts don't line up, I retract my story. I make an edit. There was a story that you've never heard from the show. It never got presented. I went to the Bible college in question, asked a very specific question about something that happened, got a very clear answer, very documented, and I didn't run the story. And so if churches are forthcoming, colleges are forthcoming, Christian schools are forthcoming, and they can show clear evidence of something not being the case, then I'm more than happy to look at it. But most churches that I deal with are extremely shady with the way that they handle these kind of situations.
And taking a situation and running with it. And I mean, if you're really going to complain about someone exposing perverts and pedophiles in your church, regardless of whatever else they're doing, if you're going to complain about someone exposing perverts and pedophiles in your church, you should step down from the ministry.
Man, they got to be careful. They have wood all over the walls. They've got a wood table. Austin's on fire right now, so we don't want him to burn the place down.
I mean, good night. He's doing your job that you're
that was such a stupid joke. Sorry,
failing to do, and he's doing it for free.
Right.
You get paid a full-time salary to shepherd your flock, to take care of people.
I mean, it's partially free. Thank you so much to all my Patreon supporters that make this possible, but it's definitely not a full-time salary.
People to teach them the word of God and protect them from evil, wicked people. And if you're failing to do that and you need someone like him to do that for you, that's your fault, man.
It felt a little degrading, someone like him. Tommy's about to come in here with some
heat. What everybody needs to remember is the Absaloms, the Adonijahs, the Amnons, that are coming from your church.
The Skwarczynskis, I guess, is who's
those people that were in David's life. They were there because of his sin.
Yeah.
And people like him, as bad, as many problems as they have, they are there because of your sin and your failure.
And you know what? There's probably a good chance that he wouldn't have, gone the way that he's gone today if there wasn't so much.
Right, because he's probably just so bitter towards that.
Because honestly,
stuff.
If I just spent all that time looking into that stuff and just seeing that stuff, and that's just what I did, is I just listened to all these testimonies of people being abused and things like that, I'd probably start to hate the IFB myself. I'm just being honest.
Yeah, so this is another thing that's brought up is you're really bitter, you're angry, it's because you're consuming so much of this. The reality is, I've said before, I don't identify myself as being bitter. I don't think I am. I think I can be truthful in saying that I'm not. I actually just talked to someone the other day and just said, I feel like I'm able to deal with this objectively for the first time in the, 7 or 8 years since I've been out of the movement. Probably less than that. It's probably been six or 7 years. And so I'm looking at it and going, hey, looking at this objectively, like I'm not getting more bitter. I am frustrated and angry, which I think is a different thing that this is continuing to go on. But I would say the reason I've gotten more, maybe more concentrated on the movement is because the longer I'm looking at and hearing stories from across the country from, where it's the same story photocopied and repeated hundreds and hundreds of times around the US, it's given me a really clear picture of the danger points in the IFB. And so I wouldn't say I've gotten more bitter or more aggressive. I would say I've gotten more focused on some of the core issues within that world.
You can't just sit and listen to that stuff all day and hear about all these stories while not focusing on the good things that the IFB has to offer and the good churches that don't come.
And this is a weird argument. This is where Austin kind of loses me is there's a lot of places that do good things where you don't have to overlook pedophilia and sex abuse. So when it comes to this whole baby with the bathwater situation, if the bathwater's poison and the baby was killed a long time ago, what are we trying to preserve?
Cover up that garbage, that don't play into that. I can see how you might turn out to be, the way that he is today.
And he is exposing this stuff.
Ouch, the way that I am today.
Now, at the same time, too, he does put out videos. I just watched one yesterday where he talked about that shooter that was shooting all the Asian women and was blaming it on the purity culture because apparently he was killing them to eliminate temptation. Okay. Now, obviously, when you are going, and this guy was a Southern Baptist guy, but when you're going to,
two things really quick. I did mention they was Southern Baptist, so I didn't try to say that he was IFB. I'll
go
continue.
and
I'll
use
explain more.
the actions of an absolute evil nut job like that and blame that on teaching purity and things like that. I'm sorry, you're out of your mind. Okay, you're not an objective person. You're not being honest. You're just out to, and you're not just about exposing perverts. You're about pushing a very liberal agenda that has a lot of false doctrine in it. And that's what he is. And so the IFB.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there. So one, theologically speaking, for me, I would believe that sex is for, marriage. I would believe that sex is something that you wait till marriage. I believe that's what the Bible teaches. And so for Christians, I believe that is the call. Again, though, I think that there are issues within the way that we present purity culture that demonizes women. I really recommend Rachel Welcher's book, Talking Back to Purity Culture, to explain this. I'm not attacking the idea of someone, not having sex until they're married or, things like that. I'm not pushing for people to just, willy-nilly have sex with whoever they want. Within the Christian realm, I think people who are not Christians, don't live under Christian guidelines, but I think those who are Christian definitely have clear guidelines and responsibilities. But all that aside, the purity culture as it stands has been extremely harmful and detrimental, I think, to the way that we view women, the way that men view themselves, the way that men are trained to be in a marriage context and beyond marriage. And so I do think it's okay to critique the purity culture movement. And I think even the name purity culture and saying that, your purity is based on your virginity is a very flawed concept. I think theologically speaking, again, this is me sharing my perspective theologically and biblically, would be that your purity is defined by whether or not you are a follower of Jesus Christ, not based on whether or not you've had sex. And so the purity culture even gets that kind of backwards. But again, even stepping outside of this and just looking at it objectively, there are things that were taught in his church and things that were said and things that he studied within that realm that I think you could say, if you took that to the logical example, you're going to get rid of that temptation by any means necessary. I'm not saying that everybody that's in purity culture is going to grab a gun and commit an atrocity like this. What I am saying is that some people are going to take things to the extreme. And for a movement that loves talking about slippery slopes when it comes to music, dress standards, and all of that, why can't we talk about potentially slippery slopes in purity culture or in the way that we teach about modesty or women or sex or other things within the IFB?
They ignore them because of those things.
Yeah.
But and fine.
The IFB, and here's another thing Tommy just said, the IFB ignores me because of the liberal theology. The IFB ignores me because they don't want to address sex abuse. It's the same reason they've ignored all the newspaper articles, the Chicago Tribune, when Jack Hyles was alive and they were posting stuff like that, the saddest story ever published, the post by the Star Telegram by Sarah Smith, which talked about 500 plus cases of abuse. They're not ignoring it because of the liberal agenda that they perceive that I have. They're ignoring it because they don't care about pedophilia in their church. I'd be happy to see them care about it. I'd be happy to partner with them to address it if they would set down that cause and kind of move forward.
Ignore stuff. I mean, that video was so dumb. It was so bad.
Mm-hmm.
He was using so many logical fallacies.
And you know what? I'm okay with this. Like what Tommy's doing right now is exactly what I would be okay with, in a dialogue about this, because there's people who do say like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, don't tie the correlation. I'm not saying, oh, for sure, it's just purity culture. This guy was not messed up in the head. He didn't have all these other issues. That's all true. but I think it's okay to just pull at that thread and see if there's any correlation between what he did and what he was consuming. It's it's the question of why. And at the end of the day, I don't I don't I don't really deeply care why someone, committed a crime like this, or why someone like I care about the how do we prevent it from happening. Sometimes the why comes up in that, but for the most part, how do we protect ourselves from those really crazy, like, fringe people?
Trying to apply these things, and it was just like, dude, stick to topic. I know you got to put a video out.
This
every
is to
week,
topic, and I
but
actually
Well,
didn't
even
put
the
a
whole,
video
like,
the
sometimes
last 2
you're
days
just not going to
because I
have
wanted
another
to
story.
stick to
even the whole
topic.
purity culture thing.
There's
and the
plenty of
idea with
stories.
that, I don't even. I feel like that. Like,
I've
but
never
blaming
heard.
people talking about teaching women to be pure and saying
Well,
that
This is
creates
all a
stuff like that. I've looked into purity
misrepresentation
culture.
of
I
the
know it as well.
conversation.
But man, that's just so bizarre. But the thing is, you can't point if that's a valid argument. Point me to the sermon where we're instructed to go kill women that we might be tempted by.
Well, he said it's because people
Nice,
of these
man.
preachers who blame the women like they're bad for being a temptation.
So we
Now,
just execute them.
Here's the thing. I grew up in the IB my whole life. I know there's people out there that act like that. I've never heard them, though. I've heard the clips from these people, but I have never been around that.
Yeah.
I grew up being taught the importance of purity.
Yeah.
Nobody ever taught me that if I'm tempted to sin,
Kill the person.
kill the person, or even it's the woman's fault. I've not been taught that.
Man.
I don't know whether this is accurate or not. I get this a lot too, and some people that have said it, I do know that their circles do teach very harmful thoughts about women. I don't know if this is true or not. I find it surprising considering the Steven Anderson, kind of world that Tommy comes from. I know I've heard Tommy talk about women dressing like whores and things like this. So I don't really buy this 100%, but I don't know what Tommy specifically teaches. I haven't listened to enough of his preaching to say this, but I do find it hard to believe he hasn't sat under anybody who's taught any kind of victim blaming like this.
I get it.
Yeah.
The old timers, they would say some of those dumb things
about
I want to know what she was wearing.
Yeah, that's wicked.
That is so messed up.
Yeah.
That is so backwards. But at the same time, I was taught it doesn't matter what she's wearing.
Exactly.
You need to have the character to look away. That's how I grew up. I grew up being taught the importance of purity, but I also grew up teaching that we live in a world that does not promote purity, that does not dress right, where there are going to be temptations, and you got to be man enough to resist the temptation, to look away.
Yeah.
And the responsibility was never put on the woman.
No.
It was put on me. That's what I grew up around. That's what I grew up.
If this is the case, then that's great.
Hearing. And most of the time when I hear some of these weirdos that they find, teaching some of that stuff.
Even this throwaway statement, the weirdos that they find, implies that we have to really dig deep to find some of this stuff. I do want to be really clear. This is not, yes, obviously a shooter is a fringe thing, but people that teach this kind of thing is not fringe. This is pretty typical IFB teaching. Again, he separates himself by saying he's new IFB, but there's a lot of crossover there.
I don't even know who these people are.
Right.
And I don't know where they found them, but yeah, to take that.
I mean, and again, that's not a super valid. You don't know where you found them. I mean, most of the things I cover are involving speakers that are at every major IFB conference that exists.
Incident. I've never even heard of anybody ever shooting up women because of that purpose before. I think this is the first. And then to just make that about this, I was like, dude.
Maybe shootings, but sexual assault, molestation, that happens a lot. Victim blaming happens a lot.
You're killing me, man.
Yeah.
I want to cheer for you sometimes, but then you do stuff like that. Come on. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
In these things.
Okay. This is the crux of what I wanted to talk about, and this is what stood out to me the most in this video, and this is what I actually talked to Tommy about on the phone when we had our conversation. IFB pastors and Tommy, a new IFB pastor, have said, we want to support you. We want to support your mission in doing this, but you do other things we disagree with, and so we can't, which is IFB doctrine is, they go out of us because they're not of us. We're separated. We're going to be separated by first or second or third degree separation. And here's the thing. I had Stacy Shiflett on my show. I disagree with Stacy Shiflett on pretty much everything, like pretty much any topic. If you set us down political or theology or practice, we would be night and day different on almost every topic. I had Stacy on my show. We talked about abuse. I supported him being vocal about abuse, calling out Jack Trieber. I set aside all those differences and sat down and said, like, okay, we can partner in this. I can support Stacy in this fight. I wouldn't necessarily recommend Stacy's church. I wouldn't necessarily recommend Stacy as like, a speaker at some kind, like, we're in different trajectories completely. But I can respect his fight in abuse. And I've done that with a lot of IFB pastors. I've had pastors call me off mic, totally respecting their privacy. So I'm not going to say names, but have talked to me. People who've been featured on IFB sermon clips have called me and reached out. And I've told them, I support you in this fight against abuse. Thanks for being a part of that. Even people that I know I would never go to their church. What bothers me is then when I need the support or when I need someone to get my back, all the IFB pastors that want me to support them in spite of me not being IFB turn around and go, we want to support you, but you had a feminist on your show, or we want to support you, but you watch horror movies, or we want to support you, but we don't like your taste in music, or we want to support you, but you're not IFB. That same graciousness is not extended to me that IFB people expect for them. If we're against abuse baseline, we're on the same team when it comes to this topic. Again, with Tommy, I'm on Tommy's team when it comes to our views on child sex abuse. We're totally on the same team. Would I recommend Tommy? Would I sit there and go like, I recommend Tommy's preaching? No, because he says things that's straight up rude and cruel to people that I'm very close to. But again, the reason that I don't talk about Tommy on my show that often, except for this episode, because I got mentioned, is because when it comes to child sexual abuse, at least in that area, we're the same. I disagree with him on pretty much everything else. I hate the way that he talks about some of the pastors that I know and really care about and appreciate, some of the people that I know who have been on my show, and the way he kind of throws casual attacks toward their way over, their belief systems. But I wish that people in the IFB and the new IFB would recognize that you can't just throw out somebody because they have these minute differences. Even the differences that are not so minute, can you look at what I'm doing and say, okay, exposing abuse, that's a worthy cause to support, even if we disagree on, church function or theology, which again, I don't really cover. I have guests that bring it up, or I have conversations that kind of go into it, but I don't really dive into those things that deeply because I'm not a pastor, and it really doesn't matter to me whether people wear suits or don't wear suits. I care about whether people are being abused or not.
But anyway, man, y'all are really disappointing me. I was really hoping to get some of the our enemies to call in today. I can't get them to do it though. I'm so nice to them. I thought after they saw me being nice.
So that's pretty much the end of the video. I would have gladly called in today. I had no idea this was happening. Didn't know there was even a video being recorded. Definitely didn't expect to be mentioned in it. But let me know, Tommy, next time you do one of these. I'd be more than happy to jump in for a few minutes and kind of talk through it. But anyway, I wanted to address some of these things, some of the kind of misconceptions, some of the things I did agree with, some of the things I didn't agree with, and kind of share my perspective there. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you this Wednesday on the next interview episode of the Preacher Boys podcast.